Our next speaker is Dr. Andrew MacIntosh, who is the University of Florida IFAS Food Science and Human Nutrition Department Assistant Professor, Food Engineer, and Fermentation Expert, who joined with UF in 2017. And he's going to be talking about Muscadine Grape sparkling wine. Dr. MacIntosh, are you ready? And I know you have a graduate student, Nick Windrick, as well, who has also been promoted to panelist.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, I'm going to be able to share my screen here. Let's see. You can see everything okay?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you for the kind introduction. I am going to talk about carbonating Florida Muscadine wines. With me is my researcher, Nick Windrick, and he's the one who did a lot of this research, and I thought it appropriate that he speak on some of the results that he found. So I've been making fermented products for a long time now. I have a whole lab set up to it. This lab behind me is our beverage research lab. And there's no real wrong way to ferment something, although it may not taste particularly great, it will still ferment. And there's no real wrong way to make carbonated wine. There's more than one, and we're going to kind of go over what is the background, why would you want to do this, and overview some research doing specifically on Florida Muscadine wines that will show they might be very well suited to carbonation and what those initial results are. So myself, Andrew MacIntosh from the Food Science and Human Nutrition Department, here the Food Engineering and Processing Lab. So we are going to get some background. We're going to talk about our project, and we are going to discuss what is carbonation, how does it work, because it is rather pertinent here in order for us to carbonate wine, over past research results, and then we'll go into this current experiment where we are actively carbonating Muscadine wines. We'll explain some of the sensory panels that we've done on Muscadine carbonated wine and talk about future research and where we're going from there. We will make this presentation available through Dr. Ali, and if anybody would like to look up some of the references and links that we provided, please feel free to do so. All right, so a bit of background. The wine industry is growing. I'm sure I'm talking to the experts here. Since 10 years before 2017, it grew 6%, which is absolutely massive. The fastest growing segment is the sparkling wine industry, and in 2017 alone, had 6% growth. However, only in 43 Florida wineries, last time we checked, currently have a sparkling wine product, and even the ones that do, it's very limited. Most of the sparkling wine made in Florida is carbonated via the champagne method, which is a highly labor intensive and makes a very nice product, but it is a very high value added product that requires a lot of personnel time and specialized equipment in order to create. I wanted to highlight this partnership on the right because it's an opportunity that I think Florida wine growers might be able to take advantage of. This is a English company or an English winery that has partnered with Pantone in order to have a cross marketing between a color that they've designed off of, or what they're calling a English wine itself, that is getting promotion and marketing by the collaboration with one of these large companies. Muscadine wine is unique. It's not standard wine, and it's going to need to be able to differentiate itself in some way. We see examples of this kind of cross-marketing all over the world. In my home province, we grow heavily Muscat wine, which is very well suited to carbonation, but also it is very different than all of the traditional varieties, much like Muscadine. What they've done with that is they've created a standard that all wineries can attempt and submit wines to be judged and marketed as the standard, what they call Bay wine. And that's just a way to combine marketing with a unique product to give customers what they expect. And sparkling wine growing so well in the market share is a great opportunity for that type of collaborative. But the objective with our research is not marketing. We are not marketers. We just see that it is growing and that it's something that we definitely want to promote and understand a little bit better. It is to specifically assist the wine industry in creating, evaluating, and educating for new sparkling wine products. The way that we developed in order to do this was by collecting wine from Florida wineries and then carbonating it to different levels, and then using sensory panels to determine what levels are preferred, because you can carbonate from a very low carbonation, almost nothing, to a slight effervescence, to standard soda level carbonations, to high champagne that actually begins to pop on the mouth. And each one will have a different effect on the sensory. And we wanted to know where Muscadine wine begins to fall on that spectrum. Are there levels that are better for Muscadine wine? And if so, we want to be able to communicate that to the producers. So we will collect the wine from the wineries. We will then analyze the wine. One of the most important parameters into determining how much carbon dioxide will actually dissolve into the liquid is alcohol, sugar, and other dissolved solids. We will perform a sensory panel assessment at the university. We'll collect and analyze all of the data and publish that out as much as we can in collaboration with the winery. Then we wanted to assist the wineries in at economic considerations. How much is it going to cost to actually implement some of these recommendations and then make that available as well to industry? We're about halfway through this project now, and we can give you some of the preliminary results with that. So carbonate, why does carbon dioxide enter wine and give us all of these lovely bubbles that we're so fond of, and that adds to the marketability of the product? Well, carbon dioxide is soluble in liquid and it will dissolve in at equilibrium based upon the pressure. If we have more pressure of carbon dioxide inside of a fixed vessel like a bottle, the more carbon dioxide is going to dissolve within the liquid. Then once you remove the headspace by opening the wine, all of that carbon dioxide is going to come out and reestablish an equilibrium with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is very low. And that's going to happen over a period of hours, which is why you're going to see those little bubbles coming up over a nice long period of time. It will come to equilibrium, and the exact time frames involved depend upon a lot of parameters, such as the type of glass or bottle that you put it in. Typically, larger wineries and breweries and anybody who's carbonating beverages carbonates via the forced carbonation method. This is where you purchase carbon dioxide in large cylinders, or you collect it from the fermentation and you put that in pressurized tanks over your wine, and it will naturally dissolve in, or you up through the wine and it will dissolve in much quicker. So forced carbonation is much less expensive than the traditional champagne styles, but is going to take time and forced carbonation will take less time, but there's a perception that it is of lower quality compared to the method, which is the more traditional way to achieve carbonation. The traditional champagne is you put in additional yeast and you dose it with extra sugar. The yeast will consume the sugar and produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct within the little bottle vessel, and that will create the carbonation, the pressure needed in order to achieve carbonation within the bottle. There is a method called the Carbonating method, which we actually examined and will be discussing briefly, where you achieve carbonation via the champagne method, but instead of a bottle, you do it in a large pressurized tank. This is some of the same attributes as the champagne method, only done so at a more economical way. So our past research, where we looked at comparing the forced carbonation method to the Carbonating method, involved us carbonating, again, wine, Florida wine, to 4 different levels. We chose a very low level, you could barely taste the carbon dioxide at all, 2 middle levels, and finally a higher carbonation level that is more like a champagne. This panel found that carbonation did have a significant effect on the mouthfeel of the wine. As you drank it, it dramatically changes how you are perceiving the mouthfeel and overall the sweetness as well. Carbonation differences were detected by the panelists. They could easily identify this is the low, this is the medium, this is the high. However, there wasn't a clear preference on whether they had the Carbonating method or the forced carbonation method. This ultimately resulted in us recommending the forced carbonation method due to less equipment required, and if there wasn't going to be a significant preference, we were going to go with the least labor intensive and costly method for carbonating. So I'm now going to hand it over to Nick, who's going to talk about our current project, which is where we're taking additional samples directly from the wineries, and we're performing a series of different carbonation levels. The idea isn't to compare whether we are using Charmat versus the forced carbonation method, but is now going to be looking at which level, if any, is going to be appropriate for Florida wines. Florida wine is unique. It might be that Florida wine tastes very good with different levels of carbonation, but if we're going to recommend Florida wine producers to carbonate their wine, we want to know not only what level, but whether we should be doing it at all, and on what styles it might be most appropriate for. So Nick works at a winery currently and has a really good inside vantage point on how this can be utilized by the industry. So I will pass it over. Nick.
Thank you, Dr. Mack. So as Dr. Mack was mentioning, this point of the research that we're doing right now is kind of in the middle. But at the beginning, when we first get the wine from the winery, the first thing that we like to do is bring it in and get an analysis of the wine. So basically, we're looking for the amount of alcohol, the amount of sugar, and what the density of the starting wine is. This is collected through, it's called it's an alcohol and extract meter. The short name is ALEX. That's like the little name of the instrument we give it. It's a very high-tech device that basically gives us this information in a rapid time with a small amount of sample needed. And the picture to the right is what the screen looks like. So for one of the samples of wine, we were looking at 11.40 volume per volume of alcohol with a total extract of 87.6 grams per liter, which is basically referring to how much total sugar is in the wine. With this raw data that we have, we will then input it into an Excel spreadsheet that myself and Dr. Mack worked to create for our purposes. We were having some trouble. Some of the numbers that Dr. Mack talked about in the previous research were a little bit kind of random, and that's because due to the sugar and the alcohol, there is a change in the solubility that the carbonation has on the wine. So the solubility is greatly affected. So this Excel spreadsheet that we have basically compiles the raw data and then puts it through 3 different carbonation equations that we found that were published. So this helps us to give an idea of what level of pressure that we need in the tank to achieve the amount of pressure or the amount of carbonation in the wine. The 3 methods, the 3 equations that we use all kind of tell us something different related to the sugar and the alcohol. And then from that, we experimentally verified which equation was the most accurate. So that is the purpose of the spreadsheet and the analysis. So some of the equipment that we use is listed below. The picture to the left is basically an in-action photo of me carbonating one of the kegs. And I put together a video of me going through the process of bottling the sparkling wine, and it does a very good job kind of outlining the whole process. I don't know if we can hear it, Dr. Mack. carbonation method. The reason is it's cost effective and efficient. Now I'm going to hook up the CO2 tank to the keg so that we can bottle some wine. First step is to hook it up to the CO2 tank and turn on the CO2 tank. The next step is to hook up the output to the keg. This allows the product to leave the keg and go into the bottle when we have that set up. The next step is the input of the gas into the keg. This is important for pushing the wine out of the keg and into the bottle. Now it's time to bottle. We're going to take 187 milliliter champagne bottle. These are designed to handle the pressures that we're working with. We're going to crank down, and this allows for a sealed vessel so that none of the carbonation can leak out. The first step we do is we pressurize the bottle. This is important because it creates the same environment that the keg is under. This allows for none of the CO2 to leave the system. Once the bottle is pressurized, we can then turn on the solution side, which is where the wine is going to be drawn in. I'm slowly going to open this release valve, which very slowly releases the pressure that is in the bottle. When this happens, the wine is going to be drawn into the bottle. So what is basically happening is CO2 is leaving the tank, and it's going in two directions. The first is to pressurize the bottle, and the second is to go into the keg, push the wine out of the output into the bottle, pushing the CO2 that has been filled into the bottle out through this release valve. The wine is now filling the bottle, and once it reaches this reference bottle of 180 milliliters, I'll then stop it and depressurize it. So now that the wine has been filled, we can turn off the solution valve and slowly release the pressure. When this is happening, I'll take a wine cork and place it in the corker. You can see the carbonation come to equilibrium with the atmosphere. Once this is done, we take it over to the corker, set it up, and cork. Now we have a corked bottle of wine. The second to last step is to put a cap on it, similar to a beer bottle cap. This is to ensure that none of the carbonation will leave the bottle. It's a secondary measure to make sure. And now you have a final product of sparkling wine. Some of the wine we simply just cap. The reason. So that's the process of how we create the sparkling wine in the lab. One thing that I would note is the smaller size bottles. They're 187 milliliter bottles, and they're champagne style, so they have a very thick glass and they can handle the pressures that we're working at. Because some of the pressures that we do are on the higher side of things, and safety is prominent. So basically, kind of to review in writing, the process of carbonating the wine is to pour the still wine into the pressure vessel, and then we're going to hook up the CO2 tank like in the video, purge the CO2 out of it so it's an anaerobic environment. This is going to be done for hours. It can be done within 24 hours. We usually let it go a couple of days just to make sure that the CO2 has come to equilibrium with the desired pressure. And then after that is when we do the bottling, which we outlined in the video. The pressure that we are looking at as far as how much is in the bottle, it's kind of a weird unit. It's referred to in the industry as a volume per volume. So in the diagram, it is looking at 2.5 volumes of carbon dioxide that are infused into the beer. So basically, this is looking at 2.5 beer bottles of carbonation are infused into the beer itself. And the conversion is about 1 volume per volume is equal to 2 grams per liter. So that kind of gives you a reference of the amount of weight per volume in the sparkling wine. So the sensory panels, we have completed 4 sensory panels. The first one was in February. After that, COVID hit and we were delayed. So the second one took place in September, and then the final 2 took place in October. So the whole process of the sensory panel was that 5 samples were going to be presented to the panelists. We have a 0 original still wine, which serves as the control, and then there's a 2 volume per volume, which this is basically the reason we picked that one is because it is the lowest amount of carbonation to be considered sparkling wine from a taxing point of view. The 3 volume per volume is the second medium level of carbonation. This is a standard carbonation level for a lot of soft drinks, tonic waters, that sort of thing. So we wanted to kind of replicate what people are familiar with for a carbonation level. The 4 volume per volume is the high end, and this is really kind of to serve as to see how the panelists like a little bit higher level carbonation, and this is on the lower end, just before you kind of get into the champagne. So this is kind of in between like a soda and a champagne, and then the 5 volume per volume is kind of the extreme champagne level, which falls into what most people consider a champagne pressure. And this is to basically encompass the whole regime of carbonation. And the purpose of the sensory panel, as Dr. Mack mentioned, was to kind of see what the ideal level of carbonation was from a panelist point of view. So that's where we tried to give them all 5 samples in a random order, and to kind of see what was the true preferred level. The questionnaire itself, what we were basically trying to answer was how much do they like each sample. So there was a likability, which worked on a 9-point hedonic scale. The 9-point basically going from dislike extremely to like extremely, with the middle being neither dislike or like. So this was looking at each sample, how much they liked it. After that, there was a sweetness question related to that sample. So they were seeing there was a 5-point hedonic scale, which looked at, was the sweetness just right? Was it too sweet? Was it really too sweet? Or on the flip side, was it not sweet enough? Or just a little too not sweet. After that, there was a comment section. So basically, we gave them comments of what they liked and what they didn't like about it. This was especially applicable for the most preferred and their least preferred. So we are looking at some of the most common comments about the most preferred and the least preferred. And so some of them, for example, for the most preferred was 71% of the panelists said that their most preferred had a balanced taste. 59 panelists mentioned that it was adequate sweetness. There's a few other comments that we were looking at, but this was basically to kind of tie what attributes of the sparkling wine they liked to their most preferred, and to all of them, but the most preferred was the most one that we focused on. The next portion is go back, actually, Dr. Mack, was the purchase intent. This was basically seeing if they were interested in buying the sparkling wine. And this was tailored towards their most preferred. And as I was mentioned in the next slide, there was a strong correlation. But then after the purchase intent, if they put an answer that referred to they would purchase the sparkling wine, we asked them how much they would pay. After that, we gave them all 5 samples and asked them to rank them from their most preferred being 1 and their least preferred being 5. So here is a graph of that ranking data. It's a little hard to kind of understand at first glance, but it's pretty simple. So each column refers to where they ranked it. So the bottom blue column refers to which one they ranked as number 1. And then so on and so forth. So the orange column, I think, is a very interesting column because it refers to what they put as their 5th least preferred sample. And as you can see, the 0 volume per volume, which is our control, it's the original still wine. We didn't do anything to it besides just open the wine bottle as the winery gave us and pour it for the panelist. But the amount of people who preferred it as the least preferred was 42 of the 85 panelists in this panel, which is a pretty significant amount considering that that percentage is almost 50%. So almost half of the panelists put the least preferred as the original still wine. If you also look, the 2, 3, 4, and 5 volume per volume are very, very close. So this kind of shows that, like, even though there was a lot of difference between the original and all of the carbonated versions, each panelist kind of had a personal preference. Some people like the lower carbonation, some like the middle, some like the extreme. So this is indicated by an A and the B. So the original still wine has an A next to the total number, which is referring to how it's statistically significant, down to an alpha level of 0.01, which is it's a very strong correlation, basically telling us that there is a lot of preference towards carbonated wine. Across all four panelists, or across all four panels, there was a total average sum of 78 panelists, which is a good amount considering it's an alcohol panel here at the University of Florida. The sensory panel itself was also, we had assistance from Dr. Charles Sims. He helped us with a lot of the organization of the sensory panel and the questionnaire, and he helped kind of interpret some of the data with us. So we sat down with Dr. Sims to kind of go over a lot of this stuff after the sensory panel. Continuing along, the likability score was 6.17. So this is the hedonic ranking scale, which means that there's more likability for all of the carbonated samples compared to 5.27, which is what which was the ranking for, or the likability for the original still wine. An interesting thing is, like Dr. Mack mentioned, a lot of the sensory attributes change with carbonation. So one thing that happens is when the carbonation goes into the wine, it forms carbonic acid, which creates a little bit more acidity in the sparkling wine, which doesn't change the overall sweetness, but the perceived sweetness on the palate is affected. But in our sensory panel, the data showed that 54% of the panelists indicated that the sweetness was just right. So it kind of showed that they noticed that the carbonation, they had their preference, but it wasn't really correlated to the sparkling wine being too sweet or not sweet enough, which I think was a very interesting observation. The last point was the purchase intent, which I think was very strong as well. Some of the numbers related to that is about like approximately 50% or so of the people said that they would purchase it. And this is based on a 5-point hedonic scale as well. So from that, then we asked them about price, and a lot of them indicated how much they would pay for it.
All right, thank you, Nick. That was excellent. So that's the type of work that we're doing on carbonation in our laboratory. We carbonate a lot of wine. Some of it's fairly good, some of it's less so. We have been working right now, we've completed sensory panels on 4 different styles of Florida Muscadine wines. The worst ranked one, I believe, was the red, where even there, approximately 50% of panelists indicated a preference for one of the carbonated options. Where the sangrias and the whites, it was a much higher, and that was one of the data that we showed. These are commercial wines that we're working with, so we cannot give you the specifics on which winery, which brand of wine, and what carbonation level was preferred, but we can indicate that there was a significant there was significant preference for the carbonated wines, and they indicated a price point that was higher than the base wines that are currently sale. That is indicative that the work that we're doing is going to be useful for Florida growers, and that if we can get a little bit more data and show for different styles, these are going to be recommended carbonation levels, it may be very beneficial. One surprising thing that we found so far is that while there was a clear preference for carbonation across almost every panel we've run so far. There doesn't seem to be a significant preference for the level of carbonation. In fact, it seems to come away from the higher levels under most styles, focusing somewhere in the middle. With Florida wines, it seems as though middle level carbonation levels may be optimal. The reasons for this is actually twofold. As you move to higher carbonation levels, the equipment required is going to be more substantial. Once you move past a standard 3.5 level carbonation, you need to start thinking about a champagne, thicker glass bottles for champagne, and also additional, the bottling lines that you're going to be using to put this in under counter pressure are going to be more expensive as well. So these are some things that we want to be considering and publishing as well. We do have published now a guide to carbonating beverages at a small scale through our IFAS. It's a little bit more technical than this presentation, but it goes into exactly how you can utilize pressure to get different carbonation results. We will also be publishing an IFAS, hopefully this spring, on different options for equipment for small scale winemakers all the way up to larger scale. We want to provide that this is the kind of equipment that might be useful to you. This is how we did it in our laboratory at the very small scale, literally carbonating within small pressurized vessels. However, it is very easy to scale this up to larger amounts, and there's other options. The larger you are, the more options there are. If you are a large winery, you can purchase inline carbonation technology that will simply allow you to pass it from one tank to another, and when it gets to the other tank, it will be pressurized and carbonated. The bottling lines can be as simple as we were doing here, literally one bottle at a time, to large standard bottling lines that are completely counter pressure. But the more you do, the more expensive it's going to be. One option that we've had a lot of interest in lately is the option of co-packing with other producers of carbonated beverage. At the large scale, that might be with soda companies. At the small scale, that might be with breweries who currently have the infrastructure and carbonation required to perform carbonation at the scale that a lot of the Florida wineries are going to be interested in working with. And we would like to facilitate that level of collaboration to introduce this new product that I think is viable. We want to continue our sensory and collaboration with more wineries as we're moving forward. It has been slightly difficult to run sensory panels in the age of COVID, but we are adapting. We're also, as Nick indicated, there was a lot of conflicting work in the literature trying to find exactly what carbonation amounts correlated with the alcohol and sugar in Florida wines. Florida wines that we found so far are a little bit unique in that they have very high sugar levels, and there had been no published information on carbonating wines of these sugar levels previously, so we are taking the opportunity to do that. It's a fairly long but in-depth experiment, but we are going to be able to publish out under different pressures, under different alcohols, and under different sugars. This is how much pressure you need to achieve this specific level of carbon dioxide. And then we want to do the analysis on the different styles of Florida wines made with Muscadine wine and determine where the optimal carbonation levels are going to be achieved. So that's what our lab has been up to. Hopefully you guys can take this out, ensure that it gets used, or at least be made aware of, so that if people are interested in carbonating the wine, they can look at some of the options that are available. We have a list of references here. And of course, we want to thank Dr. Sharkoff and Popanon for inviting us to present this research. Thank you to the local wineries for graciously donating a large amounts of wine to be carbonated and given out in the sensory panels, and to the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services for funding this project. We want to have the links to their IFAS and the bottling video are going to be at the end of this presentation if anybody wants to have a more in-depth look on how we were able to carbonate at the very small scale in their laboratory. I would now like to take the opportunity to answer a couple questions. And yes, this presentation would have gone a lot better with a little bit of wine. The last time that Nick presented on this project, he actually had a little demonstration where he had the different carbonation levels and would uncap each one to show not only how quickly the carbon dioxide would come out and how the different products would look for, in that case, specific winemakers, but also how the mouthfeel would change dramatically simply by adjusting the amount of carbon dioxide. And it's an excellent sensory exercise to see just how much the sweetness is changed and the mouthfeel by adjusting this one parameter. Oh. I will stop there and I will ask if there are any questions yet.
We have time for a few questions. I know, yeah, several people have said next year we're not only having an in-service training on pruning, but also on, we want to all be sensory panelists for your sparkling wine. That would be really educational, I think, to get to try that out, as you described.
It's a very value-added process, and it,
yes.
By taking the time, investing in the equipment, it produces additional options that are going to be available. Whether winemakers take advantage of that or not is completely up to them and the market forces at large. But it's an option that hopefully that they'll be made aware of.
Can you tell us how much more people were willing to pay for a sparkling wine over a still wine?
Nick?
It was, I can pull up the numbers real quick, but going off the top of my head, the price indicated, so we had 5 price points, $10.99, $12.99, $14.99, $16.99, and $18.99. The percentage breakdown between each one was approximately 55% at the $10.99 and 33% at the $12.99, and then about 10% at the $14.99.
All right, I'm going to ask a question now, or answer a question on whether we built the apparatus or whether they're commercially available. There are commercially available units for every different range of carbonation widely available. They can be used for brewing, for winemaking, etc. We custom built the one that we have in the laboratory for 2 reasons. We needed to be very precise, and we needed to span the entire ranges of carbonation from almost nothing all the way up to extremely high in order to assess them properly in the panel. We weren't able to find a piece of equipment that was able to span that wide range, but a winery wouldn't need to. And if anybody wanted to carbonate themselves, I would highly recommend simply purchasing one of the options available. Once you've tested it yourself, maybe with a small rig, all you need in order to carbonate your wine is a small pressure vessel and a tank of CO2. And you can assess whether this is going to be an advantage for your product. And then you can begin to narrow in what range is going to be appropriate for your product. And we are very happy to help with that.